You're not even family." My mother-in-law, Nancy, spat out the words with such venom, followed by my husband, Mark, sneering at me as if I were an outsider in my own life. I had come to their house, hoping for some sense of family warmth, but all I got was cold stares. They ordered me to sleep in the basement, a suffocating, windowless space where the temperature hovered at 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Meanwhile, they retreated to the air-conditioned comfort of the living room, leaving me behind like some discarded piece of baggage. The smirks on their faces were the final straw. The next morning, I would disappear without a trace, but not before leaving divorce papers right where they'd find them. The voicemails, 100 of them, all from my shocked husband, would pour in, but by then, my revenge had only just begun. My name is Angela, and 3 years ago, at 25, I married Mark. We were in love, or at least I thought we were. I had been drawn to his story, the tales of hardship and overcoming adversity that made me believe I'd found a kindred spirit. He was 2 years older, someone who had lost his father when he was in high school and had grown up too fast as a result. I had experienced loss too, and his pain echoed my own. He seemed gentle, kind, someone who'd been shaped by life's difficulties but hadn't become bitter. "I've been through a lot, Angela," he'd said one night as we sat on the couch, the lights dimmed. "But I'm stronger for it." It was easy to love him, to imagine our future together. And for the first year and a half, it was a dream. We moved into a modest house, close enough to his mother's place, and settled into married life. His mother, Nancy, was warm toward me at first, and while I knew she had a sharp tongue, she was family. She'd welcomed me, an orphan with no close relatives of my own, into their lives. For a while, everything was as I'd hoped. But things started to change. Slowly at first, like a storm brewing on the horizon, Mark began coming home later and later. At first, it was the occasional late night, nothing unusual for a man with a busy job. But soon, his arrivals crept into the early morning hours, his excuses vague and dismissive. "Where have you been? It's almost 1 a.m., I'd ask, worried but trying not to sound accusatory. "Just out," he'd reply, already halfway to the bathroom. "I'm going to take a shower." I'd sit by the door, waiting for him to come home, feeling the weight of his absence grow heavier each time. I worked full-time too, but no matter how tired I was, I'd wait for him, hoping for some explanation, some sign that the man I married hadn't changed. But all I got were his deflections and, eventually, his anger. "Mark, your hands are filthy. What have you been doing?" I asked one night, noticing his shirt covered in dirt. "Stop nagging me," he shouted, his face twisted in frustration. "Don't interfere with what a man does, just shut up." His words cut deep, and for a moment I was too stunned to respond. The Mark I knew had never spoken to me like that. But as the days passed, I realized this wasn't just a bad day. This was him now, distant, secretive, and cold. Nancy, too, began to show her true colors. Once the supportive mother-in-law, she now barged into our home whenever she pleased, using a spare key Mark had given her without my knowledge. She'd help herself to our food, our household items, anything she could take. "Nancy, if you need something, just let me know, and I'll make sure to get it for you," I'd say, trying to keep the peace, but she'd scoff at me. "Who are you to tell me what to do in my son's house? You're just the daughter-in-law. Don't get cheeky with me." It didn't matter how many times I asked her to stop taking things without asking. She'd ignore me, sometimes even trashing the place before leaving. It was like trying to reason with a tornado. It all came to a head one summer, just as Mark took time off work for a vacation. He decided that we should spend it at his family's home, staying overnight for the first time instead of our usual day trips. "I wish you had told me sooner," I said, scrambling to prepare everything for the visit. I hoped this could be an opportunity to talk things through, to maybe fix whatever had gone wrong between us. I still believed that family bonds could heal these rifts if we just sat down and talked like adults. But I was wrong, so very wrong. The next day, when we arrived at his family's house, Nancy greeted us at the door with a cigarette dangling from her lips. "You're late," she snapped, opening the door just enough for us to squeeze through. "The traffic was bad," I explained, already feeling uneasy. There was a slow car in front, and I was thinking of tailgating them real close, Mark chimed in, laughing. In that case, you should have overtaken them on the opposite lane, Nancy said, smirking. If the cops come after you, just shake them off. I stood there stunned. Who were these people? The Nancy I thought I knew, the Mark I had married. They had transformed into strangers before my eyes. It was like a switch had flipped, and suddenly, I didn't belong in their world anymore. Angela, Nancy said, interrupting my thoughts, I need you to take care of the neighborhood association's accounting. The paperwork's all over there. She pointed to a pile of receipts and documents on the table. Before I could even reply, she snatched the gift I had brought, a box of jellies, from my hand and tore into it, completely disregarding any notion of hospitality. Go on, get started on those books. I looked at Mark, hoping for some support, but he had already settled into a chair, flipping through channels on the TV as if I weren't even there. I tried to convince myself that this was just part of being the dutiful daughter-in-law, but as the hours dragged on, I felt more and more like an outsider. I worked on the accounts until my head was spinning, but no matter how much I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Later that night, after Mark and Nancy returned from some late-night meeting with their friends, they led me to the basement where they expected me to sleep. It's hot down here, I said, my voice cracking as I stepped into the sweltering room. The thermometer read 105 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air was thick and stifling. There was only a moldy mattress on the floor. This is good enough for you, Mark said, his voice cold. You're not even family. Nancy chuckled as they both walked away, leaving me standing in the oppressive heat. I felt a mixture of shock and rage rise inside me. How could they treat me like this? I pleaded with them, begging to at least sleep on the couch in the living room, but Nancy's eyes gleamed with malice. You'll sleep here, finish the accounts, and then we'll talk. With that, she slammed the door, leaving me alone in the suffocating basement. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I felt like I was being buried alive. That night, as I stood outside in the cool night air trying to clear my head, I overheard Nancy on the phone, laughing and talking with one of her neighbors. Her words sent a chill down my spine. So that's the plan, she said, her voice low but clear. We'll end this marriage tomorrow. My heart pounded in my chest. They were planning to get rid of me. They had never intended to let me be part of the family. This had all been some twisted game to them. I was done. I waited until the house was quiet. Then I packed my things, found the divorce papers online, and printed them out at the nearest store. I left them neatly in the basement where they would find them, and then I left. I didn't look back. The next morning, my phone exploded with voicemails. 100 of them. Mark's voice was panicked, Nancy's full of rage, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. The revenge had only just begun. The morning after I disappeared, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Every few minutes, another voicemail would come in, each more frantic than the last. Mark's voice, the same voice that had dismissed me and treated me like an inconvenience, was now pleading, confused, and even scared. What's the meaning of these divorce papers? He shouted in one message. Angela, come back. You can't just leave like that. There were others, too. Messages from Nancy dripping with anger. You stupid, ungrateful woman. Are you planning not to come to the festival today? Get back here now. I listened to a few of the messages, and then I stopped. They were nothing but noise to me now. They had treated me like dirt for so long, and now they were scrambling to control the narrative. But they had lost that power. I had made my move, and I wasn't going to look back. That morning, I made my way to the site where the neighborhood summer festival preparations were in full swing. I could sense that things were about to get interesting. I wasn't going to stay quiet any longer. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me. As I approached the festival grounds, I could hear raised voices. Even from a distance, I could see the chairman of the neighborhood association, William, glaring at Mark and Nancy, who both looked like deer caught in headlights. What is the meaning of this? William demanded, waving a stack of papers in front of them. I recognized those papers immediately. They were the complaint documents I had dropped off at William's house late the night before. Mark and Nancy stammered, their faces flushed with panic. They hadn't expected this. They thought they had everything under control, but they hadn't counted on me. I made my way over to the group, walking with a quiet confidence that surprised even me. When Mark saw me, his face twisted with rage. "Where have you been?" he barked. "You were supposed to finish the financial report." Nancy was right behind him, her voice shrill. "You were so happy to say you'd handle the books yesterday. Where's the report?" I didn't flinch. "I finished it," I said calmly, my eyes locking with William's. "And I found some things that didn't add up." William turned to me, looking both surprised and curious. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, knowing that this was my moment. While I was doing the accounting for the neighborhood association's budget, I realized that the expenses didn't match the allocated funds. No matter how many times I went over the numbers, they never added up. I could feel the crowd around us growing larger as neighbors stopped what they were doing to listen. Nancy and Mark exchanged nervous glances, trying to play it cool, but I could see the panic in their eyes. "The budget hasn't changed from last year," I continued, my voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "But the receipts and the amount spent are way off. When I asked Nancy about it, she told me to make the numbers match up and insisted I mark the entire budget as spent, even though it wasn't." There were murmurs from the neighbors now. I saw a few people looking at each other, their faces filled with confusion and suspicion. Mark stepped forward, his face red with fury. "You're just making things up. You must have made a mistake with the calculations." Nancy nodded vigorously. "Yeah, she's just confused. This girl doesn't know how to handle finances. What a mess." But I wasn't done yet. "No," I said firmly. "There's more." Last night, when I was in the garden trying to cool off, I overheard Nancy on the phone, talking about how she was planning to pocket the extra money from the budget. She even mentioned paying off debts with the funds from the neighborhood association. Nancy's face turned ashen. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. "I recorded the whole conversation. Would you like to hear it?" The entire crowd fell silent. Even William looked taken aback. Without waiting for permission, I connected my phone to a nearby speaker and pressed play. The recording filled the air, loud and clear. Nancy's voice, slurred from too much alcohol, echoed through the festival grounds. "It's easy to pocket the neighborhood funds," she said in the recording, laughing. "With this, we can pay off the debt, no problem." There were gasps from the neighbors, and William's expression darkened as the truth of what I was saying became undeniable. Nancy's plan was exposed for everyone to hear. Nancy let out a scream and lunged toward me, but I was quicker. I stepped back, holding my phone out of her reach. Mark grabbed her arm, trying to pull her away, but he was just as shaken as she was. "You two have been embezzling the neighborhood funds," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "You've been using the money for your own personal gain, and now everyone knows." Nancy looked like she was about to faint, and Mark's face was drained of color. "No, no," Nancy cried. "You don't understand. We were just borrowing the money. We were going to put it back." William, his face filled with fury, stepped forward. "Borrowing? You call this borrowing? You've stolen from the entire neighborhood." Mark, desperate, tried to turn things around. "Mom was just struggling," he said, his voice shaky. "She's a single parent. We were trying to get by. We made a mistake, but we can fix it. Please, let's not make this a bigger deal than it needs to be." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. They were still trying to manipulate the situation, even after being caught red-handed. But I wasn't finished yet. "Oh, and by the way," I added, reaching into my bag again, "here's the luxury handbag Nancy bought with the embezzled money." I held up the bright orange handbag for everyone to see. "She's been showing it off for weeks." There was a collective gasp from the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief. "That's the one she was flaunting at the last meeting," a neighbor shouted. Nancy looked like she wanted to melt into the ground, her face turning an even deeper shade of red. William, looking at the bag and the documents in his hands, shook his head in disgust. "You two have a lot to answer for," he said coldly. Mark tried to speak again, but this time no one was listening. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. Their scheme had been exposed, and the neighborhood was furious. I looked at Mark, feeling nothing but relief that this chapter of my life was finally closing. "I've already filed for divorce," I said, my voice steady. "It's over." Mark's face twisted in anger, and for a moment I thought he might lash out. But then he saw the police car pulling up to the festival grounds, and the fight drained out of him. He slumped. Defeated Nancy, on the other hand, was still defiant, muttering under her breath about how unfair this all was. But even she couldn't escape what was coming. The police officers approached, and I watched as my soon-to-be ex-husband and mother-in-law were taken into custody. Their heads hung low in shame. It was over. Finally. As the police car drove away, William turned to me, his expression softening. "You did the right thing, Angela," he said. "Thank you for exposing this." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. And as I walked away from the festival grounds, leaving the chaos behind me, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new life, one without the lies, the manipulation, or the cruelty. I had taken my first step toward reclaiming my happiness. In the days following Mark and Nancy's arrest, a strange calm settled over my life. It felt surreal, like I had woken up from a long nightmare. The weight that had been pressing down on me for so long, the constant manipulation, the deceit, the cruelty, was gone. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The news of the embezzlement spread quickly through the neighborhood. People were shocked, of course, but there was also a sense of relief. William, the neighborhood chairman, had filed an official report, and the police were already investigating the full extent of Mark and Nancy's theft. I knew they would both be facing serious consequences. But as much as the neighborhood's anger was directed at them, I found myself receiving an outpouring of support. Neighbors who had once seemed distant and reserved now approached me with kindness, offering words of encouragement. Some even apologized for not stepping in sooner when they had seen how poorly Nancy and Mark treated me. "You've been through so much," one neighbor said, her eyes full of sympathy. "You didn't deserve any of it." It felt good to be seen, to be heard, after all the isolation I had experienced. And as the days passed, I began to realize that this wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one that I could shape on my own terms. The divorce papers were processed quickly. With all the evidence of Mark's infidelity, his involvement in the embezzlement, and the verbal abuse I had endured, the court had no trouble ruling in my favor. The settlement included not only alimony, but also compensation for the savings Mark and Nancy had drained from our joint account. In the end, they owed me over $30,000, which they would be paying off for years to come. But the financial compensation was just a small part of what I gained. The true victory was my freedom. Freedom from the toxic cycle I had been trapped in for so long. I had moved into a small apartment in the heart of the city, far away from the memories of my old life. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every morning, I would wake up to the sound of birds outside my window and sunlight streaming through the curtains. And I would smile, knowing that I was in control of my own happiness now. One morning, as I was sitting by the window with my cup of coffee, my phone buzzed. It was a message from William, the neighborhood chairman. "Angela, I hope you're doing well. We've been talking, and some of us think you'd make an excellent candidate for the city council. You've got guts, and you've shown that you care about this community. Let me know if you're interested." I stared at the message, stunned. Me? Involved in city politics? I hadn't even considered the possibility. But as I thought about it, I realized that maybe this was the next step for me. After everything I had been through, I wanted to help others, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Maybe this was how I could do that. Later that evening, I met up with William to discuss the idea. He was enthusiastic, explaining how I could use my experience and my newfound sense of empowerment to make a real difference in the community. "You've already proven that you're not afraid to speak out," he said, smiling. "We need people like you in leadership." It felt strange, imagining myself in that kind of role. But the more we talked, the more I realized that this could be my chance to rebuild, not just my own life, but to help rebuild trust and integrity in the community. Meanwhile, common news of Mark and Nancy's downfall continued to spread. After the police investigation, it was revealed that they had been embezzling money from not just the neighborhood association, but also from other community events over the years. Their debts were astronomical, far beyond what anyone had expected, and they were both facing serious jail time. Nancy, ever the schemer, tried to plead for leniency, claiming that she had only done it to support her family. But no one was buying it anymore. The evidence was overwhelming, and even her crocodile tears couldn't save her. Mark, on the other hand, had grown more desperate. After the divorce was finalized, he had tried to reach out to me, leaving messages asking for forgiveness, for another chance. He claimed that he had been misled by his mother, that he hadn't meant to hurt me. But I wasn't listening. I was done with his lies. One day, I received a letter from him, sent from jail. I debated whether or not to read it, but in the end, curiosity got the better of me. The letter was filled with apologies and regret, with Mark begging me to help him out of the mess he had created. "I know I made mistakes," he wrote, "but we can start over, Angela. Please don't leave me like this." I folded the letter and set it aside. There was nothing left for me to say to him. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. As the weeks turned into months, I began to truly feel the weight of my newfound independence. I was no longer the same person I had been when I first married Mark. I was stronger now, more sure of myself, and more determined to build a life that was filled with joy and purpose. One afternoon, as I was walking through the city, enjoying the crisp fall air, I received a phone call from my lawyer. "Angela," she said, her voice warm, "I just wanted to let you know that the settlement has been finalized. You've officially won." The words sent a thrill through me. I had won. Not just the legal battle, but the battle for my own life. I had fought for my happiness, and I had come out the other side stronger than ever. That evening, I sat down with a glass of wine, reflecting on how far I had come. The person I had been, the scared, uncertain woman who had let herself be mistreated by the people who were supposed to love her, was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to fight for it. I thought about Mark and Nancy, about all the ways they had tried to tear me down, and I realized that their actions had only made me stronger. They had shown me exactly what I didn't want in my life, and because of that, I had been able to break free. As I sat there, watching the city lights twinkle outside my window, I smiled to myself. I had survived, I had thrived, and I knew that no matter what came next, I would face it with courage and strength. In the end, Mark and Nancy would remain a distant memory, figures from a life that I had left behind. They would continue to pay for their mistakes while I moved forward, building a life that was filled with love, happiness, and fulfillment. And as for me, well, I was just getting started.